Will God put more on you than you can bear? If you've been a Christian for any substantial amount of time, I know that you have heard this phrase used somewhere. He won't put more on me than I can bear. It's in devotionals, it's on t-shirts, it's cross-stitched into pillows, it's on mugs. There's whole songs that have been written on this theme. I think Hezekiah Walker has a good song on this subject. But is it actually biblical? Now, we're going to be doing another video in my Context is Key series, but I just want to pause here. I know that in this series, sometimes it can feel like I'm kicking the legs out from under you when there's a phrase that you have used for your whole Christian life, and then you figure out, wait a second, that's not actually biblical, or maybe that's not what the Bible really means when it says that. And let me just say, my goal here is not to kick people's legs out from under them. It's not to be the persnickety, well, actually type of person that's trying to be super granular. My goal is for us to establish good principles for reading our Bibles, because if we do that, it will help us to avoid being misled. And you see a lot of people being misled because they don't know their Bibles. Okay. Who am I? I'm Stephen Johnson with Winded Studios, where I seek to proclaim Christ, teach with wisdom, and help you grow in maturity in your walk with God. So this phrase, he won't put more on me than I can bear, is frequently something that is extrapolated from a passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. So we'll go ahead and jump over to the Bible and see what it actually says. The verse that I most frequently hear people use to cite this is verse 13. So we'll go maybe a couple of verses before and see what it gets us, okay? So if we start at verse 12, it says, "Therefore, let anyone who thinks that he stands take heed lest he fall. No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation he will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it. Therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry." So I'll stop there. This right here is a passage that people will often use to say, God will not put more on me than I can bear. If you go to verse 13, it talks about not letting you be tempted beyond your ability. And the thought here is, hey, if God's not going to let me be tempted beyond my ability, he won't place more on me than I can actually handle. So whatever situation I'm in, I can handle it because God has let me not be tempted beyond my ability. Okay. But is this what this is actually talking about? In context here, then, I've actually gone to this passage a few times on this channel, but Paul is actually dealing with food that is sacrificed to idols. And the idea is that you should not be participating in idolatry if your conscience is defiled by eating food that is sacrificed to idols, okay? So really what it's talking about is really fleeing sin and fleeing idolatry. It talks about that in verse 12. If you think that you stand, take heed, otherwise you may fall, okay? In 13, what it's talking about here is not just like sufferings or burdens in your life. It's actually talking about temptations. Really what this is saying is when we willingly sin, we had a choice to do otherwise, right? We had a choice every time that we commit these sins willingly. We have the choice to not do that, right? Have you ever heard someone who's like, no, I just couldn't help it, right? She threw herself at me. I had to sleep with her, you know? It's like, no, brother, you had a choice, right? You didn't have to do that, okay? Now, sometimes the reason why we feel like we don't have a choice and that we just fall headfirst into temptation is because we've put ourselves past the point of self-control. And so once we've put our own selves past the point of self-control, we don't have self-control and then we fall, right? An example of this is the person who struggles with drunkenness and alcohol, like an alcoholic. You wouldn't go and sit at a bar. That wouldn't be wise for you to do because guess what? You don't have the self-control to maintain that, right? A lot of times the reason why people, are like, I fell and I watched pornography on Friday is because on Monday you were at the grocery store and you were looking with lustful eyes. And then on Tuesday, you were watching one of those reality TV shows where people are half clothed and you were, looking with lust. And then on Wednesday, then you were scrolling through all these quote unquote fitness reels on Instagram with folks half clothed. And then on Thursday, then you were daydreaming about lustful thoughts and all kind of stuff. And then on Friday, then you were just mindlessly scrolling at 12 a.m. at night with no internet blockers and no accountability, alone by yourself in the dark. Okay, of course, you have put yourself in a position where you're going to fall because you put yourself in a position that's past your point of self-control. control. So essentially, what this verse in the Bible is saying is that you have the option to not sin. You have a path where you don't actually have to take the road to sin. It says right here, he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation, he will also provide what? The way of escape that you may be able to endure it. The problem is we oftentimes don't want to take the way of escape. We oftentimes enjoy participating in the sin, right? Like I think about Joseph, back in Genesis, and how Potiphar's wife came on to him and wanted him to sleep with her. Okay, that account would have been written differently in scripture if it had been many of us, right? It would have been like, she told me to do it, you know what I'm saying? So the point here is that we have the option to not sin, and we have to choose to honor the Lord, to flee from idolatry, flee from temptation, and choose to take the path of honoring God and not sinning, okay? However, I want to bring up another passage that I think describes this a little bit better. I think there's a truth that's even better than the fact that he won't put more on me than I can bear. I think there's one that's even more biblically accurate. And this, I'm going to go to 2 Corinthians, and we're going to go to verse 8. I've been reading 2 Corinthians recently, and it's just, sometimes you just go back to a book of the Bible and you read it and it just jumps out at you. That's what's been happening to me. In verse 8, I'll start at, it says, "For we do not want you to be unaware, brothers, of the affliction we experienced in Asia. For we were so utterly burdened beyond our strength that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt that we had received the sentence of death, but that was to make us rely not on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. He delivered us from such a deadly peril, and he will deliver us. On him we have set our hope that he will deliver us again." Paul is writing right here, and he's talking about all the afflictions that he experienced while he was in Asia. And if you read through the book of Acts, then you will find out a lot of the things that Paul experienced. There were riots, there were lashes, there were beatings. He got stoned at one point. He was persecuted, mocked, all kinds of crazy things. And all of this, he's like, listen, like we read the account in scripture and we just think, oh, he was just this amazing man of faith that just endured all of it, right? But look at him, what he's saying in this passage. He says, I was so utterly burdened beyond my strength that I despaired of life itself. Have you ever been like that, where there's a situation that is so great, so much bigger than you that you're like, I don't even want to be alive right now? This is exactly what the Apostle Paul is saying right here in this passage. But here's what he says. That was to make us rely not on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. One lesson that Paul took from the suffering, not that the suffering itself was good, but that Paul took a lesson from the suffering, which is that it was to help him rely not on his own strength, but on God's. And that's one thing that I think the phrase, he won't put more on me than I can bear, actually is missing. The fact that is not, he won't put more on me than I can bear. It's more, he won't allow me to go alone through what I can't bear or what I can't bear with God. There's probably a more creative way to say that, and I'll think about it and then want to post an update to this video, but I don't have a lot of time today, so I'm just going to record this and keep on moving. The fact is that if God is with you, you can bear the struggle. If God is with you, you can make it through, right? And even though they despaired of life itself, it says right here in verse 9, they felt that they received the sentence of death. It helped them to rely on God, who has the power to even raise the dead. So even when the situation is hopeless, we serve a God who is a God of hope. Even when the situation is lifeless, we serve him who is the way, the truth, and the life, right? This purpose, one of the things that we can learn from the struggles and the burdens that we carry is that it helps us to learn to rely on God. If we were really honest with ourselves, we pray a little bit harder when we're going through, don't we? Right? If we were really honest with ourselves, when things are not hunky-dory, when they're topsy-turvy, then we learn a lot about how to have a relationship with the Lord, right? Matter of fact, let me go to this Psalm right here, Psalm 119. I think it's around verse like 70 something, 71. Let me go to this. But one thing, yeah, verse 71, one thing that this is a verse that I just love, right? And this is David talking right here. And he says, "It is good for me that I was afflicted, that I might learn your statutes," right? He doesn't say that the afflictions were good, but however, he said it was good for him that he was afflicted, that he went through, that he had struggles, because in spite of those, he learned God's statutes, right? And one of the ways that we really learn whether or not our faith can be tested, whether or not our faith is actually true, is when we go through persecution, right? Matter of fact, let's even go to James chapter 1 here, if I can type correctly. James chapter 1, verse 2, it says, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." One of the things that we can learn from the sufferings, the struggles, and the trials that we go through is that it helps to test our faith so that we can develop character, right? A faith that has never been tested is not really a faith that is steadfast, right? A faith that has never been tested is not one that's proven, right? You can think about the parable of the sower that Jesus talks about, and there are certain seeds that are sown very, very thinly or on rocky ground, and they take root immediately. But then as soon as there's some persecution or some struggles or some trials, then they wither, right? And we want to be Christians who honor the Lord with a steadfast and a deep and a mature faith. And some of that means going through circumstances that are so great that we cannot rely on our own strength, and we are forced to rely on the strength of our God. There's another place in 2 Corinthians, I believe it's chapter 12, where Paul talks about that there was this thorn, a messenger of Satan that was sent to harass him. And he begs and pleads that God will allow this thorn to be taken from him. But God does not allow the thorn to be taken from him, and instead says, "No, my power is made perfect in your weakness," right? There is an act of how we grow with the Lord, about how our souls are growing in maturity when we are forced to go through circumstances. So when it comes to the phrase, "He won't put more on me than I can bear," if you're the one bearing it, you absolutely will have more on you than you can bear. If you're the one bearing it, there absolutely will be situations in your life that are too great for you that you cannot endure. And that is the reason why you have to rely on the strength, not of yourself, not of your friends, not of your family members, but the strength of God himself. So when you're in those struggles and when you're in those tough times, rely not on your own strength, but rely on God. I encourage you to look through the Psalms, because the psalmists, they do this all the time. They go through just some real circumstances. Matter of fact, let me just go to Psalm chapter 4, right? It talks about, "Answer me when I call, O God of my righteousness. You have given me relief when I was in distress. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer. O men, how long shall my honor be turned into shame? How long will you love vain words and seek after lies? But I know that the Lord has set apart the godly for himself. The Lord hears when I call to him." The Psalms are full of stuff like this, where the psalmist is crying out, "Lord, help. Lord, be with me. Lord, do something. There's enemies that are surrounding me and they're lying on me and they are attacking me and seeking my life." And the Psalms are oftentimes yet unresolved. You don't get something in the middle of the Psalm that says, "And the Lord answered the prayer and everything was okay." No, it just breaks. And the psalmist right here, verse 3, it says that he doesn't even have the problem resolved yet, but he can turn to God and say, "I know that the Lord has set apart the godly for himself." What is he doing? Even though he's in the midst of the situation and it's not resolved yet, he is turning towards the Lord and God is strengthening him. And that is a message for all of us. When we are enduring tough circumstances, they are too great for us, but they are not too great for the amazing God that we serve. So anyway, as I wrap up here, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13 is about fleeing from sin, fleeing temptation, right? It is not about, "He won't put more on me than I can bear." And what I would say is that if you are the one bearing it, there will be more on you than you can bear. But if you trust in the strength of God, you can overcome all things. In fact, you can do all things through Christ who gives you strength. And that's actually what that verse is about in context. With that, I'm going to close this video out. Hope this helped you. Like and subscribe to see more of my content, and be blessed.